All right, to discuss President Volodymr Zelensky's visit to South Africa, we're joined by Thembisa Fakude, Director of Africa-Asia Dialogues. Good evening, Thembisa. Thank you very much for joining us on the late edition. So, tomorrow's visit will be the Ukrainian president's first visit to South Africa, of course, amid a flurry of diplomatic efforts aimed at securing a peace deal now. How significant is this visit?
I think it's very significant for South Africa and for Ukraine. But I think at the same time, President Cyril Ramaphosa will find himself in a dilemma, because before South Africa was accused of siding with Russia, and since the warming up of relations with between President Putin and Donald Trump, we've seen Ukraine moving closer to Europe, to the Europeans, and notwithstanding that this visit has been organized quite some time ago. We now have President Volodymr Zelenskyy visiting South Africa following that spat between himself, J.D. Vance and Donald Trump at the White House. Mm-hmm. So again, I think South Africa might find itself being once again accused of this time around siding with Ukraine.
Sure. You succinctly characterize the climate under which this visit comes. That here you've got the global shifting sands. We're seeing a reconfiguration of allies or political allies on the world stage. Like you say, we've seen a warming up of the US to Russia, and now some sort of a rift between the Ukraine and the United States. And then many had questioned, even when this visit was being announced, that South Africa, given its own shift in the relationship between South Africa and the United States, would it be advisable to host the Ukrainian president right now, because we are also not in the most favorable position when it comes to America? So this most certainly is a dilemma that you've just outlined for us. What does South Africa do or say tomorrow?
Well, this has been a trip that was organized quite some time ago, so it was long planned. That's the first point. The second point is South Africa has always insisted on its neutrality in this regard, and insisted on wanting to find a peaceful solution in the conflict or following the invasion of Ukraine by Russia. So I think President Cyril Ramaphosa is following on those promises, and hopefully something tangible is going to come tomorrow. But importantly, President Volodymr Zelenskyy comes at a time when Europeans are moving closer to South Africans, and South Africans is moving closer to the Europeans. And I think this will indeed cement a new relationship between Ukraine, South Africa, and indeed the African Union.
Mm-hmm. Most certainly, South Africa's government has consistently impressed upon nations their non-aligned stance, but not to conflate party and state here. But if we look at the governing party, the African National Congress, their relations and alliance with Russia predates everything that happened with the invasion. So does that not pose any dilemma, in as much as there essentially should be no conflation of party and state?
Well, I think we tend to make the same mistake in South Africa, thinking that the USSR, or the Union of Soviet Socialist, is the same as today's Russia.
Yeah.
In fact, if you look at the books of history and research on which state within the USSR hosted the South Africans, you'll be shocked to realize that it was actually Ukraine. Mm-hmm. So the relationship between South Africa or the ANC with the USSR was not necessarily with the current day, only with the current day Russia, but also with Ukraine. So President Volodymr Zelenskyy comes at a very important time, and I think it's important for us to continue reminding ourselves that there is a wide relationship and a long relationship, historical relationship between the people of South Africa and the people of Ukraine.
Mm-hmm. Now, most certainly, we've seen the statement indicating that here there's an intention to strengthen ties between the two nations, but many have said that the issues around the peace deal will feature prominently in discussions between the two countries. But if we had to look on just the strengthening of relations, what could be a way, or in which areas of cooperation could they possibly look to strengthen their relations?
I think economically we have a potential of strengthening a relationship with Ukraine in terms of cultural exchanges. There's also a possibility and the potential of us strengthening relationships with Ukraine. Politically, it's extremely important for us to do so. Ukraine is positioned, or geographically positioned, in a very important space in the globe. And a relationship with a country that is on the Black Sea, that's known to have been exploiting fertilizers, seeds and wheat, amongst others, to African nations over the years. It's an extremely important nation that I think we should continue and encourage relationships with moving forward. And I think President Cyril Ramaphosa understands that, and he's going to stay away from politics, but just insist on one, conflict resolution, but importantly also encouragement of economic ties and relations.
And then how beneficial is it broadly now for the Ukraine to strengthen its relationships on the continent, not just with South Africa? Because we all remember in 2023, when South Africa led that Africa Peace Mission, it didn't go so well. The reception wasn't all that warm on the part of Volodymr Zelenskyy. But a lot has changed, which you succinctly characterize for us, the current political dynamics, that the relationships are changing. So would it be extremely beneficial for the Ukraine right now to solidify its place in Africa, or to almost strengthen relations with many nations on the continent?
I think Ukraine has learned a lesson. One, also Africans understood the importance of Ukraine, particularly after the Black Sea deal that was facilitated and brokered by Turkey. That's the first point. The second point, numbers count in multilateral organizations, particularly the UN. And I think for a very long time, the Ukrainians or Ukraine underestimated the power of the 54 nations, African states, in terms of voting in support of Ukraine at multilateral levels. And I think President Volodymr Zelenskyy has realized that pressure on the United States will come from multilateral system, and Africans in general will play a very important role in that regard. And I think that's what's going to be emphasized during this visit, and that's what he's trying to emphasize during this visit to South Africa.
All right, Thembisa, thank you very much for your insights this evening. That's Thembisa Fakude. He's Director of Africa-Asia Dialogue, speaking to us ahead of that all-important visit by Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelenskyy tomorrow.